There's a new mystery knit along coming to needles near you. Are you ready for 6 hooded patterns in one knitting adventure? I hope you are. I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and this is my 14th annual mystery knit along. I love hosting mystery knit alongs, but what I love even more than hosting mystery knit alongs is designing mystery knit alongs. And this year, I've designed not one hood, but 6 hoods. It's like this ginormous knitting adventure. So I hope you're ready to grab your yarn, pack your needles, and head out on the trails with me. So the way Into the Hoods works is you'll have 3 hood shapes to explore and a 1 color and 2 color option. Those 3 hood shapes are really fun. One is your traditional balaclava, which just has a cowl neck, which rolls up in the inside. The other is a hooded dickie. You know my alter ego Lola loves saying dickie. A dickie is fitted around your collar and sits underneath your jacket beautifully. And then the 3rd hooded version is a scarf. So if you're someone who likes to have a hood and then wrap something around your neck, that version might be for you. When you sign up for the mystery knit along, you'll be able to choose which shape you want to knit and if you want to do 1 color or 2 color. I think it's a good idea to tell you that if you are a newer knitter or you don't love being challenged on your needles, then you're likely to want to knit with 1 color. If you like a bit more of a challenge and you are up for trusting me, then I would go for the 2 color option. It's really fun for me to come up with something where there's something for everybody just in one piece. I have a feeling a few of you are going to be knitting more than one of these along with me over the next month. So the way a mystery knit along works is to join us, you sign up by purchasing the pattern. When you purchase the pattern, you'll get a PDF that gives you all the information you need to be ready for the first clue on October 22nd. It'll tell you about yarn choices, it'll tell you what needles you need, it'll talk to you about gauge, which I'll talk about more in this video. Then when that first clue launches, you'll get a fresh PDF, and in that PDF will have the instructions for the first clue. I do make videos like this for each clue, so you'll have lots of support. And then you'll also have my Ravelry group and my Facebook group where you can make new friends and ask questions and support each other. And I am there daily helping you all out. This is my favorite time of the year, and I cannot wait to jump into the hoods with you. The first thing for us to talk about for Into the Hoods is to talk about yarn, which is all of our favorite things, right? So let's go ahead and do that first. Okay, I've been dying to say this for months. Let's get into the yarn. So we all know that knitting and stashing yarn or shopping for yarn are 2 complete separate hobbies. I am happy to admit that I am excellent at both of those hobbies, particularly good at shopping for yarn. So while designing Into the Hoods, I knit all 6 hoods, which meant I bought fabric or went stash diving for all 6 of those. And then I have a basket here, I'm just going to show it to you, full of a ton of other yarn that could be hoods as well. So I'm just going to go over many options with you, giving you an idea of why you might want to choose one over the other. But what I would say is page 2 of your pattern gives you some really pretty detailed answers to your questions. So if I get through this section and you still have a question, I suggest you read page 2 of your pattern to make sure you're making a decision that you're going to enjoy about your yarn. So I'm going to start with my 1 color option yarns, the ones that I chose just to show them to you. The yardage for all of the different options that you could make, either 1 color, 2 color, balaclava, dickie, or scarf, are all on page 1 of your pattern. So the first one of Into the Hoods I made was a balaclava. And I made this with Nightshades, which is a yarn from Harrisville in New Hampshire. And it's a gorgeous American cormo. For Into the Hoods, and this is important to say, you can use DK weight, worsted weight, or Aran weight yarn as long as you get gauge. The heavier the yarn you choose, the thicker and more stiff the fabric is going to be of your hood. So you'll see that most of my choices that I have made are in the DK worsted range because I like a fabric that can really fall. But if you live somewhere really cold, you might want to choose a heavier weight yarn, like an Aran weight yarn. What I do suggest in the pattern, if you're knitting the scarf, is to make sure to choose a lighter weight yarn so that there's some air between your stitches so you have this really nice flexibility. You don't want to use an Aran weight yarn for the scarf because it's going to sit all bulky around your neck. Okay, going back to that yarn I chose. For the balaclava, I used Nightshades from Harrisville. It's a gorgeous DK. I find it quite soft to the skin. I will tell you that other people find it a little bit toothy. So if you are very sensitive to wools that have a little bit of tooth to them, you might want to stay away from this. I find cormo to be quite comfortable against my skin, and I'm thrilled with the balaclava that I knit in Nightshades. I think it's going to be for my daughter for this winter. I think she's really going to enjoy a dark black gray hood. The Dicky that I knit in a solid color, I knit in Wool Dreamers Mota. And Mota is 100% Spanish wool. It is a wool that has a twist to it, but it's also got this really nice squish. So it ends up creating a fabric that's nice and dense, but also airy at the same time. I love the way that this knit up to gauge. So that is what I knit my Dicky in. And then my scarf version, I ended up doing something kind of fun, and I ended up knitting with a fingering weight and a Surrey alpaca held together. Let me just get these under the camera so that you can see them all beautifully. So I held a Fiber MacGyver Surrey silk, which is 74% baby Surrey alpaca and 26% silk, together with some Sweet Georgia Tough Love sock that I had in stash. And when these two yarns were held together, they created this absolutely gorgeous marl that has all this vibrant life to it. And this fabric, as you can see, knit to gauge in the pattern, is very, very drapey. And that's why I chose it for the scarf. So you don't need to hold two yarns together for the scarf, but it's certainly an option for all of them. If you decide to hold two yarns together, you'll just want to play with them a little bit to get an idea of what the finished fabric will look like. You might want to hold them together. Sometimes you can just wind a bit together, and you can see that this little bundle right here gave me a pretty good idea of how those two yarns were going to knit up together. So don't forget that in our Ravelry group and Facebook group, as you're thinking about yarns, you can always ask questions there if you're not sure how yarns that you have in stash are going to play together. So those were my three options that I did for my initial solid versions or one color, let's say, of Into the Hoods. Then when I got into my two color versions, I really had a good time. And so the version that I used, or the yarns that I use, let me see if I can get all of these cards for you so we're all together on that. The yarns that I used for my balaclava, I had enough of these in stash. And I used Farmer's Daughter's Fibers Pushkin, which is a gorgeous 100% Rambouillet, which is in the merino sheep family. It's incredibly soft. This is like a really plump DK. And then I used some Dream State from Spin Cycle Yarns. This one's colorway is called Deep Bump, and this is a DK weight yarn as well. when you're working with two colors, you'll see in the pattern that I suggest that you can play with your two colors to decide which one you want to be your main color and which one you want to be your contrast color. So on the bottom here, I have the pushkin being the main color and the dream state being the contrast color. And then up here, I reversed that. As long as you check yardage for the shape hood you are making, you can make that decision and you can do a little swatch just like this, where you play around with one yarn as the main color and then you play around with the other yarn with the main color. And then you can decide which way you like those yarns playing off of each other best. I actually, when I looked at this, I couldn't decide. I just ended up going with the solid being the main color, but there's no reason not to do that. As I show you these two color versions, you're going to see I really leaned into playing with dyed in the wool yarns. I find a lot of us have dyed in the wool yarns in our stash. You can also use a hand painted yarn. You could use a speckled yarn. You can use a gradient yarn for the balaclava or the dicky. It won't work incredibly well for the scarf version. All of these notes are in the pattern. I know I'm like throwing a lot out at you as we play here. I did do, just for fun, I decided to try another swatch with the nightshades and that deep bump to see how that looked. And you can see that there's more contrast between the deep bump and the nightshades. And I actually really like that I stayed in the same color family with these two yarns, but played with that dyed in the wool and the solid. This has a little bit more of a like kind of, dare I say, prison stripey look to it. And this one's just a little bit more subtle and like sophisticated. So that's something to think about as well. I think it helps with mystery knit-alongs for me to show you lots of options. The version that I did for the dicky, which as I was knitting this, I was traveling this summer when I was knitting this, and I had many people kind of stop me and be like, what are those colors on your needles? The main color that I used is this BFL BFF from Utopia, and that's 100% blue-faced Leicester wool, also a DK weight. And then the dyed in the wool I used is from Yarn Hero, and it was my first time working with their yarns. And this is a color mix DK. So this is the version that I used for my dicky. Again, you can see up here on the top, I did the main color as the solid, and then the contrast color or the CC as the dyed in the wool, and then I've reversed it down here. I ended up going with this version instead of this version. Again, completely up to you what you do. So that is another version or pair of yarns you can work together. A lot of these are interchangeable that I'm showing you. I have a feeling a lot of you are going to do a tiny little stash dive, find one yarn that works, and then maybe need to go to your local yarn store or to a fiber festival to find the other yarn. But I bet you have something that's going to kind of get you going with your hood. Finally, I knit the scarf version of my two color version with Kelborn Wool and Scout, which is one of my favorite basic DK weight yarns. It's absolutely gorgeous, 100% wool. I love the girls at Kelborn Woolen so much. And that is my solid background color, my main color, but you'll see that it's really heathered, so it's not reading as entirely solid, which I love. And then what I used for my contrast color here is Making Tracks by Junction Fiber Mill, which is also a DK weight yarn. I didn't end up trying this one in reverse because I loved it so much this way that is just what I ended up going with for the scarf version. So those are all the yarns that I knit my 6 versions of Into the Hoods with. I've been working on this for many, many months. And then the next thing I want to show you in this ginormous basket is a bunch of other ideas as I'm thinking about knitting more Into the Hoods. And perhaps the most fun thing is that when I was at Flock this summer, I found a gradient set from Rainier Rose's yarn company called Into the Woods. So you know I had to buy it. I actually had to buy 2 of them, and I'll end up using one as a giveaway for Gauge Swatch contest that we'll have in the Ravelry group. And I want to show you kind of your choices. Oh, I have a place to throw yarn as I'm done with that. I want to show you choices under the camera of yarns that you could match with this gradient set. So I would think that this gradient set would probably be your contrast color. And then for your main color, you could go with something solid. And this is a skein of Malabrigo Rios. I just loved this like deep red color with all of these colors here. It's kind of popping against all of them. This will work well for the balaclava or for the dicky, but probably not for the scarf because you don't have enough yardage with those mini skeins. You can end up using these mini skeins and making a magic ball like we did with Caltipus. I can give you a link to that if you've never made a magic ball before. So one option would be to use Malabrigo Rios, which is a nice superwash, yummy, soft. You notice there's not a lot of difference in texture between this yarn and those yarns. Or if you want like a little bit of difference in texture, you could use nightshades. And this nightshades, it's called Fever Dream. And this Fever Dream has kind of like a red undertone to it. So again, you'll have that red kind of contrasting with all of these colors, but you'll also have a contrast in texture between this and these. So that's just like an option, gives you something to kind of jump off and look in your stash and see. Another option to think about is I was at my local yarn store, Connected Stitches, and I got this skein of Helix DK from Utopia, which I've not knit. I've knit with that BFL, but not with their Helix. This is 100% USA Rambouillet and Targhee wool. It's incredibly soft. It's dyed in the wool, so it's got lots of color changes in it. And that I could either pair with Kelborn Woolen Scout, maybe in this like deep, deep blue, which I think is so beautiful. And that would stay kind of like in the woolly side of things. Or if I wanted to add a little bit of like a smooth sheen, I could pair that with a Spun Right Round Squish DK, which I believe is a 100% superwash merino DK. So you can see that I'm getting like a little bit of the shine here against that wooliness, so they pop off of each other really beautifully. That's another way you could go. Another thing you could do if you are a lover of a lover of the superwash DK weight yarns and you have a stash of them, like I have a stash of them, you could go ahead and do a fun variegated with a solid hand dye and have those just play off of each other like that. If you're somebody whose skin is a little bit sensitive or you don't do well with yarns that have a bit of what I call tooth in them, this would be a really good option for you. Another option, which I know I'm going to purchase when I'm at New York State Sheep and Wool in October, is some yarn from my friends at Catskill Merino, because their merino yarns are uber soft. And I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to get for Max to make him a Dicky version, because I heard through the grapevine that he would enjoy a Dicky version hood. So I'll probably knit that along with all of you. So that's another version. Another idea to do, and I think this is pretty fun, is I had some Manos Marla that I got when I was in Uruguay last winter, and I thought that that looked great with that Malabrigo Rios. So now I have to decide, does that Rios go to that other project, or does it go to this hood idea? Do you see how many choices we have? And she's not done. If you want to do a solid version, I have this gorgeous little Fox True Wash DK that would make a really beautiful solid color hood, or you could be pairing this with a variegated or with a dyed in the wool if you had something there. But this is one of my favorite DKs along with the Kelborn Woolen Scout. If you want to make a balaclava or a dicky, I believe there's just enough yarn in one ball of Noro Ito. So if you have stashed a ball of Noro Ito, I have about 4 balls. How do I do 4? 4 balls of Noro Ito stashed because I just see them and I love them so much. Noro Ito would do beautifully and into the hoods. So you might already have some on hand, or maybe you'll see some when you are at your local yarn store. Finally, If you're thinking about doing something with a Surrey alpaca or a mohair and a fingering weight yarn and holding those double, I got this when I was on Bainbridge Island and at La Mercerie, and I love these two yarns together. This is Biches and Bouches Le Petit Lamb's Wool. And then this is from Explorer Knits, and it's this gorgeous Surrey alpaca lace that has all of these like really subtle variegations in it. So these two together will end up making a fabric that is just like a little bit lavender, but very, very gray and neutral. And I know with my hair, the way it's changing and my green eyes, that this would be a really fun winter option for me. So that is just another option to kind of get you sparked and thinking. I am so excited for you all to go stash diving. I am so excited for you to go to your local yarn store and support them. I'm thrilled for you to go to a Fiber Fest. I will be at Rhinebeck in October. So if you run into me there, I'm happy to help you choose yarn. If you need help choosing yarn, I'm always happy to help other people yarn shop because it keeps me from yarn shopping too much. So that was a big deep dive into yarn. I hope you had fun watching that. I clearly had fun collecting yarns to show that all to you. The next thing that we want to talk about is the other materials that you're going to need to knit into the hoods. Okay, the other things that you'll need for knitting into the hoods. On page 1 of your pattern, I go over all of the needles that you'll need. The pattern calls for 2 US size 8 needles or 1 size bigger than needed to get gauge. I use double pointed needles for this. It's pretty important to use double pointed needles or a short circular. It's easier if you have double pointed needles for this step. But if you don't have them, don't go out and buy them. You could use a short circular instead. You'll only need 2 of them. And then you will need 1 US size 7 36-inch circular needle. That is the size you'll use to get gauge. So you'll go up or down needle sizes from that needle size. And we'll talk about gauge in the next section. If you are knitting the balaclava and dicky, you'll also need a US size 6, 16 or 20-inch needle. And for the dicky alone, you'll also need a US size 7, 16 or 20-inch needle. If you're somebody who's comfortable working magic loop or you have an interchangeable needle set, an interchangeable needle set comes in really handy for the balaclava and the dicky to just keep it from you having to change needles. If you don't have an interchangeable set, ask for one for the holidays this year because it will change your knitting life. The other thing that you will need are a few stitch markers. These stitch markers are little chipmunks that were made for my survival kit, my Into the Hood survival kit by We Won Stitch Markers. They're adorable. They're all holding something different. And then you will also need at least 30 inches of stitch saver. You want to use 2mm stitch saver. If you get a survival kit, there is a length of stitch saver in there. I know many of you already have some stitch saver on hand. And if you've never heard of stitch saver before, I'll link to a blog post below that tells you more about stitch saver. It is used in clues 1 and clue 2 of this pattern, and then it is not used again. So you will need it right away with clue 1. The other thing that you might find handy but you don't need is a digital scale. I'll give you a link below to the one that I use all of the time. What the digital scale does is helps you with each clue to make sure that you're on track for yarn usage. It can help with people who get a little bit insecure about how much yarn they're using and how much yarn they have left. When you're knitting a mystery knit along, that can get a little scary. So if you weigh your yarn before you start knitting and then you weigh your yarn after every clue, we'll know, given the percentages that all the testers used for all of their knits and my knits, we'll be able to tell you if you're on track or not. So having a scale as part of your knitting basket, I think, is an indispensable tool. I travel with mine. I have it all the time. Another thing I have in my shop is a survival kit for Into the Hoods. We've had such a good time putting these kits together. I ended up designing an organic bandana and having them printed in India, and it's one of the highest quality bandanas I've ever worn. I've been wearing mine a ton. It has the Lola's Choice logo and lots of like little hints to Into the Hoods on it, and I think you'll find this bandana indispensable as you're working on Into the Hoods. Inside this little survival kit are lots of little goodies to keep you fed and fueled and clean. And also, in case you need to, I don't know, light a fire because you're cold, make sure you do that somewhere safe. There's really fun little squirrel end stoppers. We've got my favorite hand cream, a stitch marker, stitch saver if you don't have any of that, some more stitch markers that are in there. The one really fun thing that I have with this survival kit is everybody who purchases it will be invited to a cast-on party on Zoom on October 22nd. So these are all available in my shop. I know you don't need it, but maybe you want it. So once you have all your materials and you have your yarn, the next thing to do is to knit your gauge swatch. So let's talk in depth about that next. Okay, once you have your yarn all prepared, it's time to work your gauge swatch. If you remember when we talked about color, you're going to want to decide which of your two colors is your main color because you'll want to knit your gauge swatch with your main color. If you're working with a single color, you don't need to worry about it. Just work your gauge swatch with that color. You're going to work your gauge swatch with needle B. All of the instructions for working the gauge swatch step by step are on page 3. So what I did for this gauge swatch below is I cast on 24 stitches and I knit more than 3 inches in stockinette stitch. And then I blocked this swatch by wetting it and letting it dry overnight, and I can measure it once it's completely dry. A mistake that I've seen people make before with gauge swatches is to measure their gauge swatch when it's wet, and your measurements will be different. Let's look under the camera at the swatch that I'll knit. You've noticed that I've cast on the 24 stitches and I've knit more than 3 inches. And when I go to measure this swatch, I'm measuring over 2 inches. The pattern calls for 18 stitches over 4 inches, which is 4.5 stitches to the inch. So if I have 9 stitches in between these this 2-inch mark right here, I know that I'm good to go. A huge mistake that people make when they are doing gauge swatches is to cast on the exact number of stitches over 4 inches and then measure all the way to the edge, but your edges are always going to be a little bit distorted, so you want to cast on more stitches and then measure in the center. Because this is a hood, it's okay that we're measuring over 2 inches. If you were knitting a sweater, I cast on at least like 6 or 8 inches and give myself a nice big swatch so that I can really measure my stitch gauge over 4 inches. So if I look right here and I want to ensure that I have 9 stitches right here, I can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm perfectly on gauge right here. If I had 10 stitches over 2 inches, I would go up a needle size because that would make my stitches bigger, and then you do another gauge swatch. If I had like 8 stitches right there, then I would go down a needle size to make my stitches smaller and tighter, and then block that swatch and do it again. Again, all of the detailed instructions for working that gauge swatch are on page 3. I will set up threads in the Facebook group and in the Ravelry group for you to post pictures of your gauge swatches. If you make more that decide that you're making more than one Into the Hood, you can enter each one of those in a separate post. I love doing contests on Facebook and Ravelry to get you guys motivated and choosing different yarns. In this case, I think you're going to have so much fun choosing yarns. I have a feeling you're going to be making more than one Into the Hood. Have I mentioned yet that they make great presents for the holidays? So this cal is perfectly timed to get a few presents done. So once you have gotten your gauge and you've got your yarn and you've got your materials, now all you need to do is wait till October 22nd when the first clue launches and attempt not to choose yarn for 5 more into the hoods like I've ended up doing. Okay, I'm not sure if I've said it before, but Into the Hoods is some good old-fashioned knittertainment. This is one pattern that has 6 different hoods for less than the cost of going to the movies. Between the in-depth video tutorials, the Ravelry and Facebook groups, we have a no knitter left behind policy, and I promise we won't keep you hoodwinked as you're figuring out what's going on your needles. I also promise there will be a lot more horrible puns between now and the end of the mystery knit along. I cannot wait till October 22nd when the first clue launches. Feel free to ask questions below or in either of those places I can't stop talking about. Let's get ready to go into the hoods together.